I'll never forget the morning I walked out to feed my cattle and found a gleaming Bentley sprawled across my barn door like it owned the place. The chrome still smelled like fresh wax. The tires barely had dust on them, and there it was blocking the only way I could get my tractor out. And of course it belonged to none other than Karen, the self-appointed queen of our HOA. She leaned against her shiny toy sunglasses on, smirking as if daring me to say something. See, Karen has a special talent for turning ordinary mornings into full-blown battles. But that day, she didn't just park a car. She parked a declaration of war. And I wasn't about to let some overpriced hunk of metal decide whether my farm lived or died. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. You've probably guessed by now, I'm not the kind of guy who fits neatly into the HOA's glossy brochure version of community living. My name's Tom, and I've spent most of my 52 years working this patch of land. It's not just dirt and timber to me. It's heritage. My father built the barn with his own 2 hands. My grandfather taught me to mend fences and rotate crops long before I learned how to drive a truck. Around here, neighbors used to wave at each other from tractors, not report each other for unsightly barns or livestock noise violations. But that was before the HOA showed up. They started creeping in a few years back when suburban families, lured by cheaper property taxes, decided country living was charming. They came in with their granite countertops, pristine lawns, and endless rules. And leading the charge was Karen, the woman who thought a clipboard gave her the same authority as a sheriff's badge. Karen wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind of person who printed out bylaws for fun, highlighted them, and then marched door to door to enforce them like gospel. The first time she showed up at my place, she wrinkled her nose at the sight of my barn as though wood was contagious. "This structure is unsightly," she said in a tone usually reserved for finding a rat in your kitchen. "It doesn't meet our community aesthetic standards." I laughed out loud because this unsightly structure had stood longer than any house in our cul-de-sac. It had weathered storms, droughts, and even a small tornado. Meanwhile, Karen's idea of heritage was probably a designer handbag passed down from last season. From that moment on, it was war. The complaint started small. She said, "My rooster crowed too early and disrupted her meditation routine." I told her the rooster didn't own a watch. Next, she complained about hay bales stacked too close to the property line. Then, it was the smell of manure, the sound of tractors, even the dust that lingered after harvest. One time, she had the nerve to march into my yard during hay season and demand I tarp the bales because they were an eyesore from the road. I asked her if she also wanted me to put curtains on my cows. She didn't laugh. Karen doesn't laugh unless it's at someone else's expense. And the HOA board, they bent to her every whim. Most of them were her friends anyway. Other transplants who thought living next to a working farm was picturesque until they realized real farming involves dirt, smells, and noise. Still, I tried to keep the peace. I patched fences, kept my dogs on my land, even stopped blasting Johnny Cash at full volume on Saturday mornings. But nothing was ever enough. Karen had it in her head that my barn, my tractors, my entire way of life was a nuisance to her perfect community. Now let me paint you a picture of our land. My property stretches wide, dotted with oaks and maples, with the barn sitting right at the center like a heartbeat. Every day starts the same. I get the tractor out, haul hay, feed the cattle, and make sure everything runs smooth. That barn door is the lifeline. If it doesn't open, the whole farm grinds to a halt. And that's exactly what Karen wanted. See, I'd heard her little comments at board meetings. Maybe Tom should consider selling. A modern development could raise property values. She'd say it with a smile like she was doing me a favor. But what she really meant was, she wanted me gone. My land flattened into yet another cookie-cutter subdivision, with names like Whispering Pines or Golden Meadows. That's the thing about people like Karen. They see tradition. As clutter and progress is whatever makes them look richer. So when I found her Bentley parked across my barn door that morning, I knew it wasn't just bad parking. It was a message, a test, a declaration that her HOA rules were bigger than my way of life. And the way she stood there sipping her iced latte like it was just another morning. Oh, she knew exactly what she was doing, but what she didn't know, what she could never understand, was that out here when you block a barn door, you're not just blocking wood and hinges, you're blocking survival. I remember staring at that car, the sun glinting off its spotless paint, and thinking, this is it. This is where Karen crossed the line. My cattle didn't care about her rules. They cared about food. My tractor didn't care about bylaws. It cared about doing its job and me. Well, I wasn't about to bow down to a woman who thought she could bully a farm with leather seats and chrome wheels. Karen thought she was clever. She thought she could use her wealth, her friends on the board, and her shiny Bentley as weapons, but she forgot one thing. On a farm, the strongest weapon isn't money. It's horsepower. And I was about to remind her of that the hard way. By the time I reached the barn door that morning, Karen was already waiting, perched on the hood of her Bentley like it was a throne. She wore oversized sunglasses that covered half her face, a wide-brimmed hat that looked straight out of a fashion magazine, and a smug grin that told me this wasn't an accident. "Well, good morning, Farmer Tom," she called, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Hope you don't mind. I needed a place to park my new baby while the landscapers finish my driveway." I stared at her, then at the gleaming hunk of machinery blocking the barn doors. The Bentley still had dealer tags dangling from the rearview mirror. "Karen," I said slowly, "this isn't a parking spot. This is my barn. I need to get the tractor out now." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, I'm sure you can wait a few hours. Your what do you call it?" "Tractor. Can it take a break?" She giggled as if farm work were just some cute hobby like knitting scarves or growing lavender in mason jars. That laugh lit a fire in my gut. "My tractor doesn't take breaks, Karen. My cattle need feeding. My hay needs moving. That's how this place runs." She waved a manicured hand, dismissing my words like they were smoke. "Honestly, Tom, your whole operation is outdated. Do you really expect the neighborhood to tolerate all this dirt and noise forever? Maybe this is a sign you should modernize." There it was, the dagger hidden in the smile. Karen never did anything without an angle. Parking her Bentley here wasn't just about convenience. It was about control. She wanted me humiliated, powerless, forced to watch my land grind to a halt because she said so. "Move the car," I said firmly. My voice low, she smirked, sliding off the hood. "And if I don't," I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the gravel. For a moment, we stood eye to eye, her perfume sharp and out of place against the scent of hay and manure. "Then you'll regret it." Her grin widened, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind those sunglasses. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said. "I'm promising you." She huffed and pulled out her phone. "You know, Tom, I could report you right now. Intimidation, harassment, violation of HOA conduct policy. You're already on thin ice after last month's rooster incident." I almost laughed. The rooster incident was nothing more than her whining that my rooster crowed at dawn, which is exactly what roosters are born to do. But she loved twisting ordinary life into violations. I could feel my blood pressure climbing, but deep down I knew losing my temper in that moment would play right into her hands. HOA disputes were Karen's battlefield, and she thrived on paperwork fines and endless complaints. If I pushed too hard, the board would side with her in a heartbeat. Still staring at that Bentley blocking my barn, I realized I couldn't win this fight on paper. I had to win it in the dirt on my terms. "Fine," I muttered, turning toward the house. "Enjoy your temporary parking spot." Her laughter followed me like nails on a chalkboard. That's what I thought. But as I walked away, something clicked in my mind. Karen thought she'd beaten me. Thought she could flaunt her wealth and connections and make me bow. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the perfect excuse to fight back. You see, when you grow up on a farm, you learn a few things about problem solving. Some problems need patience, some need tools, and some need raw horsepower. That Bentley was big, shiny, and expensive, but it wasn't built for barns. It wasn't built for mud, hay, and steel. My tractor, on the other hand, that was built for crushing obstacles. The more I thought about it, the more the idea grew roots. I could almost hear my father's voice. "Son, when someone blocks your barn, you don't ask for permission. You plow right through." And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. But before I tell you my plan, let me explain why this wasn't just about convenience. Blocking that barn wasn't a prank. It wasn't a neighborly spat. It was sabotage. If I couldn't get my tractor out, I couldn't haul hay to the cattle. I couldn't maintain the fields. Everything would snowball into a mess within hours. That car was choking my farm at the throat. Karen knew that. She wanted that. By noon, word had spread across the neighborhood. A couple of curious neighbors lingered near the fence, whispering and pointing. I caught snippets Karen's car. Tom's barn. He's furious. That's how it always was. She played the role of queen bee, and the rest of the hive buzzed around her, eager for gossip. I fed the chickens, stacked some wood, tried to go about my chores, but my eyes kept drifting back to that silver Bentley, shimmering like a taunt in the summer Sunday. Every squeak of its leather seats as she adjusted every jingle of her bracelets, as she scrolled through her phone, it all drilled into me. Around mid-afternoon, I'd had enough. I walked over again, trying one last time. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "This is your last chance. Move the car and we can put this behind us. She looked up from her phone, unimpressed. You're cute when you think you have authority. I'll move it when I'm good and ready. In the meantime, maybe you can find a hobby that doesn't involve heavy machinery. That was it. The final straw. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just turned on my heel and headed for the tractor shed. Because sometimes the best answer isn't words. It's action. And the rumble of a John Deere engine speaks louder than any HOA bylaw. The tractor shed wasn't far from the barn, but by the time I reached it, my pulse had slowed just enough for reason to sneak back in. My father always told me, Tom, anger's like a fire in dry hay. It'll burn fast, but it'll take everything with it if you're not careful. And for a moment, I hesitated. Running that Bentley into the ground would feel good, sure, but it might also drag me into a mess I couldn't easily climb out of. So I decided to give diplomacy one last shot. I walked back to the barn, wiped the sweat off my brow, and pulled out my phone. Karen was still lounging against her Bentley, scrolling, probably posting pictures of her new toy on social media. Karen, I said as evenly as I could manage. I'm calling the sheriff. This isn't just inconvenient, it's obstruction. You're interfering with my work. She didn't even look up. Go ahead. Sheriff's department knows me very well. My husband donates to their annual gala. She flashed me that grin again, the one that made me want to grind my teeth down to stumps. I dialed anyway. The deputy on duty, a young guy named Miller, answered. I explained the situation. There was a pause, then a careful cough. Well, Mr. Harris, he said, technically it's private property, and HOA disputes usually fall under civil issues. Unless she's trespassing or causing direct harm, there's not much we can do. I could practically hear the shrug through the phone. Miller wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't about to wade into Karen's swamp of HOA bylaws. They always managed to muddy the water just enough to keep law enforcement hesitant. Fine, I muttered, hanging up. Karen lowered her sunglasses, her eyes glinting with victory. Told you. You're just wasting your time. You should really read the community handbook sometime. I clenched my fists, but forced myself to stay calm. All right, then I'll bring this to the HOA board. That night, I did just that. I attended their meeting held in the community clubhouse with its air-on conditioned comfort and rows of bottled sparkling water. The board members sat in a neat little row clipboards ready as if we were in court instead of a neighborhood gathering. Karen naturally presided at the center seat like a queen on her throne. I presented my case. I explained how her car had blocked my barn door for nearly a full day, preventing me from doing my work. I emphasized that the barn was functional, not decorative, that this wasn't about aesthetics, but survival. Karen interrupted before I could finish. Tom, you're exaggerating. I parked temporarily while waiting for contractors. Surely your farm animals could wait a few hours for their hay. It's not like they were starving. Her words drew polite chuckles from two of the board members. I swallowed hard. This isn't funny. She's interfering with agricultural operations. If this continues, my livelihood is at stake. One of the board members, a man named Douglas, tapped his pen on the table. Tom, we understand your frustration, but technically community rules allow for visitor parking in shared spaces. Shared spaces? I barked. That's my barn, Myland. What part of that is shared? Douglas shifted uncomfortably. Well, we'll need to review the boundaries. But in the meantime, perhaps you could be more accommodating. Karen's guests bring value to the community. Value? I nearly laughed. Her Bentley parked across my barn door is value. Karen leaned back in her chair, satisfied. See, Tom, this is why you're always in conflict. You don't adapt. You cling to your old ways. Progress requires compromise. Progress I spat isn't parking a luxury car where livestock are supposed to be fed. It's arrogance, plain and simple. But the board didn't care. They shuffled papers, avoided eye contact, and finally adjourned the meeting with a vague promise to revisit the guidelines. I left with nothing but the sound of Karen's laughter trailing behind me. Driving home under the stars, I felt that helpless weight pressing down on my chest. I'd tried reason. I'd tried the law. I'd tried the system, and every door had slammed shut in my face. The next morning, when I stepped out onto my porch, the Bentley was still there, polished, gleaming a smug silver blockade in the Sunday Karen had doubled down. I swear I could hear my cattle lowing louder than usual, restless without their proper feeding schedule. The sight of them pacing near the fence hammered home what I already knew. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about them, my responsibility. That day, I tried one last olive branch. I walked up to Karen, hands raised. Karen, listen. I don't want this to escalate. Just move your car. I'll even help you find a safe spot until your driveway is done. We can put this behind us. She lowered her glasses again, her smirk cutting deeper than any blade. Tom, you just don't get it, do you? This is bigger than a car. Your barn is an eyesore. Your tractor is a nuisance. Frankly, your whole farm drags down property values. If you don't like the way this community is going, maybe you should sell and move somewhere less civilized. Her words hit harder than I expected. Not because they had truth, but because they dripped with contempt for everything my family had built. It wasn't just about hay, manure, or barn doors. To her, my entire life's work was disposable. And that's when the last ember of patience burned out. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just turned and walked toward the shed, each step heavier than the last. Karen's laughter rang behind me, shrill and triumphant. That's right, Tom. Run along to your toys. You'll learn eventually who's really in charge around here. But she had no idea what kind of toy I was about to unleash. Because when diplomacy fails, there's only one language left to speak, and my tractor was fluent. The shed door creaked open like the start of an old Western showdown. Sunlight spilled across the steel-green body of my John Deere dust mows, swirling in there as if the machine itself were waiting for the call to arms. I'd spent years with this tractor. It had pulled plows through stubborn clay, dragged hay wagons stacked higher than the roofline, and yanked fence posts out of the ground when storms tore them down. To me, it wasn't just a machine. It was family. And that morning, it became my weapon. I stood there a long moment running my hand over the hood. The metal was warm from yesterday's work, still carrying the smell of oil and earth. In my head, I heard my father's growly voice. On a farm, problems are solved with steel, sweat, and horsepower. Never forget that, son. And I hadn't. I climbed into the seat, adjusting the worn cushion until it fit just right. The key slid into the ignition with a satisfying click. When the engine roared to life, the sound rolled across the fields like thunder. Chickens scattered. A few cows turned their heads, and I swear even the oak trees seemed to tremble. Karen still perched near her. Bentley flinched. She pulled her sunglasses down, squinting toward the shed, her smug smile faltering. For the first time all day, she looked uncertain. I eased the tractor out into the open, the ground vibrating beneath its massive tires. The neighbors who had gathered along the fence gasped, phones whipping into the air like prairie dogs spotting danger. The word had clearly spread. Everyone wanted front row seats to see whether Tom the farmer would really do it. And I wanted them to see because this wasn't just revenge. It was theater. It was a reminder to every single person hiding behind HOA bylaws that some of us still played by older, stronger rules. I parked the tractor in the yard and cut the engine. Not yet. I wasn't going to smash first and think later. I needed to prepare. I grabbed my toolbox, checked the hydraulic lines, tightened the bolts on the front loader. If I was going to make a statement, I wasn't going to risk my John Deere on Karen's vanity project. My tractor deserved respect, even in battle. As I worked, flashes of memory flooded back days when my father and I hauled logs after a storm. The time we pulled a neighbor's truck out of a ditch, even the nights we sat on the hood drinking iced tea under the stars. That tractor had been my constant, my partner. And now it was about to teach Karen a lesson she'd never forget. By late afternoon, the tension was thicker than the humid air. A half-dozen neighbors leaned on the fence line, whispering nervously. Some were rooting for me. Others probably couldn't wait to run back to the HOA with stories. But no one was leaving. Karen strutted toward me, hands on her hips, voice shrill. Tom, you're not seriously thinking of touching my Bentley, are you? That's a $200,000 vehicle. You so much as scratch it, and I'll have lawyers on you before sundown. I leaned against the tractor calm as a preacher on Sunday. Then move it. Hairjaw tightened. No, the crowd murmured. Karen wasn't just playing chicken. She was daring me to act, betting I wouldn't have the guts, but she didn't know how far she'd pushed me. I wiped my hands on a rag, climbed back into the cab, and fired up the engine again. The roar silenced the yard. The neighbors stopped whispering. Even the birds in the trees seemed to hold their breath. Karen's face went pale behind her makeup. She took a step back, clutching her phone like it was a shield. Slowly, I lowered the front loader, the hydraulics hissing like a beast. Waking from slumber, the edge of the bucket gleamed in the setting sun, sharp and unforgiving. Tom, don't you dare! Karen shrieked, her voice cracking for the first time. I didn't answer. Words had failed me too many times already. Instead, I inched forward the tractor, rolling steady, deliberate, like a freight train that had found its track. Every bump of the tire echoed through the ground. Each foot closer drained the color from Karen's face. The Bentley sat there smug and silent, its polished chrome daring me to cross the line. It wasn't just a car anymore. It was the embodiment of every insult, every fine, every meeting where the board had laughed in my face and I was done laughing. I stopped just a few feet from the bumper, the bucket poised above like a guillotine waiting to fall. Karen screamed something incoherent, waving her arms, but her voice was lost in the rumble of the engine. I killed the engine again, letting silence rush back into the yard. The tension was unbearable, like the world itself was waiting for me to make the call. And in that silence, I turned to the neighbors. "You all see this?" I shouted. This is what happens when people think rules matter more than land, more than work, more than respect. She's blocked my barn all day. My cattle go hungry while she poses with her car, and the board backs her up. Well, I've had enough. A few neighbors nodded. One even clapped softly before catching himself. I started the tractor again. The crowd jumped. Karen shrieked, but I didn't move forward, not yet, because the moment of destruction deserved to be savored. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice written in steel and rubber, and tomorrow the whole neighborhood would know. You don't block a barn door in my town, not unless you're ready to pay the price. The moment I pressed my boot to the clutch and eased the tractor forward, the crowd went dead silent. You could hear nothing but the steady growl of the John Deere engine and the faint buzzing of cicadas in the trees. The front loader bucket hovered like a steel predator, lowering inch by inch until it lined up perfectly with the hood of Karen's Bentley. Karen's scream ripped across the yard. "Stop! You'll destroy it! It'll sue you for everything you own." But I wasn't listening anymore. My world narrowed to the rhythm of the engine, the vibration under my hands, and the gleam of chrome just begging to be humbled. The first contact came with a crunch that reverberated through the metal of the tractor. The Bentley's hood buckled like a soda can under a boot. The polished silver crumpled in on itself, the emblem snapping clean off and clattering to the dirt. Gasps erupted from the fence line, half in horror, half in delight. Karen staggered backward, clutching her head like she was watching a child being hurt. "My car, that's a Bentley. Do you even know what it's worth?" I pushed the lever and the bucket pressed harder, the hydraulic arms hissing like snakes. The windshield spiderwebbed glass popping and spraying across the ground in glittering shards. Tires squealed, suspension groaned, and that once perfect luxury toy screamed like a wounded animal. Neighbors raised their phones, recording, capturing every second. This wasn't just a scuffle anymore. It was a spectacle. A battle of lifestyles, wealth versus grit, playing out in a shower of shattered glass. I inched forward, the tractor's massive tires climbing the side panel. The Bentley sank into the earth under the weight, its alarm wailing as if crying for mercy. The shrill siren echoed off the trees, blending with the crowd's stunned laughter. Karen lunged forward, trying to wave her arms in front of me. "You're insane, Tom. You'll go to jail for this." The tractor's shadow swallowed her whole. For a moment, she looked so small, her manicured hands flapping helplessly against the roar of the engine. I locked eyes with her through the cab glass and said nothing. That silence hit harder than any words. Then I drove on. The Bentley flattened beneath the weight, the roof caving in with a thunderous crack. Leather seat store airbags burst with white puffs that floated like surrender flags. I backed up slightly, then rolled forward again, grinding what remained of the frame into twisted, smoking ruin. The smell of burnt rubber and scorched paint filled the air, sharp and metallic, mingling with the earthy scent of hay from the barn. It was destruction raw and absolute, and it felt righteous. Neighbors cheered now, some laughing, some hollering like they were at a rodeo. One old farmer even whistled, clapping his hat against his knee. "About time someone put that woman in her place," he shouted. Karen fell to her knees, shrieking like she'd lost a limb. "My husband will have your farm. You'll be bankrupt." But her threat sounded hollow, drowned beneath the crunch of metal collapsing on itself. I finally eased off, pulling the tractor back. Where the Bentley had once stood, gleaming like a trophy, there was now only a mangled heap of luxury rubble. Bent rims stuck out at odd angles. The hood folded like paper, the engine block spilling dark oil into the dirt. I killed the engine and climbed down my boots, hitting the ground with deliberate finality. The silence afterward was deafening, save for the Bentley alarm, which sputtered and then died with a pathetic whimper. I turned to Karen. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hat crooked, her voice from screaming. For the first time, she looked less like a queen and more like a child caught throwing a tantrum. "You should have moved it when I asked," I said simply. The crowd erupted again, laughter and applause mixing with the buzzing of a dozen camera phones still rolling. Karen scrambled to her feet, pointing at me with a trembling hand. "I'll ruin you, Tom. I'll have the sheriff here in 5 minutes." I shrugged. "Good. I'll explain how your car blocked my livestock access all day. Pretty sure state law doesn't look kindly on that." Her mouth snapped, shut her eyes, darting around as if searching for someone, anyone, to back her up. But then neighbors had seen enough. They weren't rushing to defend her. If anything, they were enjoying the spectacle a little too much. I walked back to the tractor, patting its hood like a trusted friend. The John Deere stood tall, spotless, except for a smear of silver paint on the bucket. The machine had done its duty. Behind me, the wreck of the Bentley smoked in the fading light. The once glorious status symbol had been reduced to scrap metal, no more intimidating than a broken wheelbarrow. And just like that, the balance shifted. Karen wasn't untouchable anymore. She wasn't the queen of the HOA with her flashy toys and smug laughter. She was just another neighbor who'd pushed too far and paid the price. As the crowd dispersed, I caught sight of Miller, the young deputy, pulling up in his cruiser. His mouth fell open when he saw the wreckage, then closed again with a smirk. He tried and failed to hide. "Even in Tom," he said slowly. "Want to explain what happened here?" I spread my hands. Car was blocking my barn. I asked her to move it. She refused. My tractor needed out. Guess the rest writes itself. He looked from me to Karen, who was wailing into her phone, and then back to the twisted heap of Bentley. He sighed. Well, this will be one for their port, but I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't here to throw cuffs on me. He was here to witness what the whole town would be whispering about for weeks, and I was fine with that because that night as I shut the barn doors with my cattle fed and my hay stacked, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, Karen's laughter didn't echo in my ears. Instead, it was the crunch of Bentley metal under tractor tires, a sound sweeter than any hymn. The wreckage of Karen's Bentley still hissed and smoked as Deputy Miller walked a slow circle around it, scribbling in his notepad. The crowd of neighbors hung back, but refused to leave their eyes darting between Karen's frantic pacing and my calm stance by the tractor. It felt like the entire neighborhood had transformed into a courtroom with Miller as the judge, the fence line as the jury, and the mangled heap of steel as Exhibit A. Karen's shrill voice carried across the yard like a siren. "Arrest him. I demand you arrest him right now. That's destruction of property. That's criminal damage. He should be in handcuffs this second." Miller held up a hand. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down. I've got to get statements from both sides before I do anything." "Statements?" She screeched. "What's there to state? Look at it, my car's ruined." She gestured wildly at the flattened mess, her manicured nails catching the evening light like daggers. I stepped forward, keeping my voice even. "Deputy." I asked her repeatedly to move her car. It was parked directly in front of my barn door all day. I couldn't feed my livestock. I couldn't move hay. She refused to budge. Karen whipped around to me, her face blotchy with rage. "That is not true. I told you it was temporary. You could have waited. Livestock don't wait." I cut in. "The law doesn't either." "You know that, don't you, Deputy?" Miller's lips twitched. I knew where I was going. Most folks in the county knew about the Agricultural Protection Act, an old piece of state legislation that gave farmers special rights during harvest and feeding seasons. It was designed to protect agriculture from interference, whether intentional or not. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded paper weathered from use. Here's the statute straight from the county extension office. Blocking access to livestock facilities is a violation. Doesn't matter if it's with a wheelbarrow or a Bentley. Karen froze. That can't apply here. This is a residential neighborhood. Miller cleared his throat. "Technically, ma'am, Mr. Harris's property is still zoned agricultural. He's grandfathered in, which means the statute does apply." The crowd buzzed like a hive. Some chuckled, others muttered. Serves her right. Karen's face drained of color. "Number! No, this isn't happening," she whispered almost to herself. Then louder. "This is abuse of power. He's twisting the law." I let her rant, then added, "You know, Karen, there's another detail you might find interesting. I'm not just a farmer. I'm also a sitting member of the County Farm Bureau, and we've got lawyers who live for cases like this. So if you really want to drag this to court, I'd be happy to oblige." Her jaw dropped. The queen bee of the HOA had finally realized the hive wasn't hers to command anymore. Deputy Miller closed his notebook with a snap. "Here's how this is going to go. Karen, I'm citing you for unlawful obstruction of agricultural operations. You'll get a fine, and if this happens again, you could face bigger penalties. As for Tom," he looked at me, his tone softening, "you'll need to file an insurance claim for the damages, but from what I see, you acted to clear access to your barn. Given the circumstances, I don't see grounds for criminal charges." The crowd erupted, some gasps, some cheers. Karen wailed like someone had told her Christmas was canceled. "A fine. You're finding me, I'm the victim here." Miller scribbled out the citation and handed it to her. "The law doesn't see it that way, ma'am. She crumpled the paper in her fist, her face contorted in disbelief. This community will not stand for this. I'll have the entire board on my side. But when she turned to the neighbors, something shifted. Instead of nods and support, she was met with crossed arms and raised eyebrows. One neighbor called out, "You've been bullying folks 4 years, Karen. Looks like karma finally showed up with 4 wheels and a plow." Another chimed in, "We're tired of your nonsense. Maybe it's time someone else ran the HOA." Her eyes darted from face to face, searching desperately for alleys. But one by one they turned away. The hive had abandoned its queen. I stood quietly watching her crumble. For years she'd used rules, bylaws, and intimidation to bend this neighborhood to her will. But tonight, the law, the community, and the cold, hard steel of my tractor had turned the tables. Karen stomped to the wreck of her Bentley, kicking at the twisted bumper. "You'll regret this, Tom," she spat though her voice shook. "I swear you'll regret this." I tipped my hat. Maybe, but at least my cattle are fed. The crowd laughed. Not cruy, but with the relief of people who'd finally seen the tyrant unmasked. Phones slipped into pockets. Neighbors began drifting back to their homes, and the evening air grew calm again. Miller gave me a nod. "Take care, Tom. I'll file the report." But between you and me, I think this neighborhood just witnessed more justice than a courtroom could ever hand out. When his cruiser pulled away, the last of the sunlight painted the wreckage in gold. Karen slumped on the curb beside it, a fallen monarch beside the ruins of her throne. And me? I walked back to my porch, poured a glass of sweet tea, and let out the longest breath I'd been holding in years. But I knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't vanish quietly. They plot, they fume. They wait for another chance to strike. What she didn't know was that I'd been waiting too. And if she ever tried to come at me again, I had more than just a tractor on my side. I had the law, the neighbors, and a lifetime of stubbornness. She could never bulldoze. For now, though, the silence was victory enough. The night after the Bentley incident was the quietest this farm had felt in years. The crickets chirped. The cattle settled into their stalls with full bellies, and the barn door stood wide open, unobstructed, and free. For once, I didn't feel the weight of Karen's shadow hanging over the property. I sat on my porch, rocking in the old chair my grandfather built, watching the stars prick through the velvet sky. The faint outline of the tractor glimmered in the moonlight, its green body streers once pristine car. Most folks would have called that a blemish. To me, it was a badge of honor. By morning, word had spread beyond the neighborhood. Folks at the feed store slapped me on the back, laughing as they asked, "So, Tom, how's the Bentley holding up under the John Deere?" I'd shrug, sip my coffee, and let them draw their own conclusions. But not everyone found it funny. The HOA board called an emergency meeting within days. Desperate to control the fallout, Karen showed up pale and frazzled, still clutching her citation like it was Exhibit A in some grand conspiracy against her. She demanded my expulsion from the neighborhood, insisted that I pay damages, even threatened lawsuits. But here's the thing. Her influence had evaporated. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her now spoke up. A mother complained about Karen finding her son for riding his dirt bike on their own property. An older couple recounted how Karen had tried to ban their flagpole because it clashed with community aesthetics. One by one, voices rose, telling stories of her arrogance and overreach. It was like dominoes falling. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to remove Karen as president. Just like that, the queen lost her crown. She stormed out, muttering about lawyers and appeals, but it was clear her reign was over. I didn't celebrate. Truth be told, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, because what Karen never understood was that power rooted in fear never lasts. The minute people stop being afraid, the empire crumbles. Life on the farm returned to normal after that. The cattle were fed, the hay stacked, and the tractors rolled without interference. Sure, the HOA still tried to toss little rules my way, paint the fence, trim the hedges, but without Karen breathing down their necks, it all felt toothless. The wreck of the Bentley was towed off, eventually leaving behind a patch of scarred earth in front of the barn. I didn't bother reasing it. I liked seeing it there, a reminder of the day a symbol of arrogance met a machine built for work. Every time I walked past that spot, I smiled. Not because I crushed a car, but because I proved something bigger. No matter how shiny the weapon, wealth and intimidation can't outmuscle grit and stubbornness. One evening, a young neighbor walked up while I was tightening bolts on the tractor. "Mr. Harris," he said shilly. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Karen like that." "How'd you do it?" I looked at the tractor, then back at him. Son, sometimes you fight with words, sometimes with laws, and sometimes I patted the steel hood, sometimes with horsepower. He laughed, but I could see the lesson sinking in. Weeks later, the farm felt lighter. The laughter of kids carried down the road. Neighbors waved more freely, and the air wasn't thick with the tension Karen used to stir. Thayland, my land, breathed again. And though I knew challenges would come, droughts, storms, taxes, and maybe even another Karen somewhere down the line, I also knew I'd be ready because the lesson my father taught me still rang true. When you protect your way of life with honesty, grit, and the right tools, no one can bulldoze it away. The barn door stayed open. The cattle thrived, and the tractor it sat gleaming in the shed waiting patiently for the next battle. Because on this farm, the war had been won. If there's one thing this whole saga taught me, it's that standing your ground isn't always about yelling louder or having more money. It's about refusing to let anyone bully you out of what matters. Karen thought her Bentley and her HOA clipboard gave her power, but real power doesn't come from possessions or titles. It comes from resilience, from roots planted deep in the soil of who you are and what you stand for. Life will always throw people like Karen in your path, the kind who think control is a right and intimidation is a strategy, but you can't let their noise dictate your purpose. Whether it's your land, your job, or your family, you've got to protect it with everything you have, even if that means getting creative with the tools at your disposal. For me, it was a tractor. For you, it might be something else. But the principle is the same. Don't let arrogance block your barn door. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with a Karen who pushed you too far? What would you have done if someone blocked your barn, your driveway, or your freedom with a Bentley drop? Your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this tale of HOA drama and tractor power justice, hit that subscribe button, because trust me, there are plenty more stories where this one came from. Because in this neighborhood, the drama never sleeps.